Kaldheim spoiler season has started, and it looks like Sagas are back on the menu. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today for a brand new Kaldheim spoiler. It's gonna be a Saga card. Sagas are actually really interesting parts of Magic the Gathering. It's a new card type that first showed up in Dominaria, and it's a card that's meant to tell like a bigger story. Each Magic card is a story in its own way, but Sagas are meant to tell a bigger story. So let's go ahead and get the Saga up on the screen. We are looking at Showdown of the Skalds. Now, this is a cool card for multiple reasons. First of all, I guess we should probably cover how Sagas work, because they're very different looking than Magic cards, mostly, but their function is pretty simple. Basically, once you put the Saga into play, then onto the battlefield, right? Once it comes onto the battlefield, you do the number one thing on the card, basically, right? So when it enters, you add a counter to the card and do the first thing. Then each upkeep after that, is it upkeep? Yeah, nope, it's not upkeep, sorry, draw step. Draw step, getting a little muddied here. So basically the equivalent of the beginning of your main phase, right? You put a counter on it and move along. So it's a 3-step process for this Saga. And I said, Sagas are a very interesting addition to Magic the Gathering. And surprise, surprise, Sagas were invented by the creator of Magic the Gathering. Richard Garfield was brought in for Dominaria, and he came up with the Saga concept, although admittedly his original Sagas were even crazier than this. But they led to the design overall of what Sagas will be, and they tell interesting stories. So this is actually essentially a poetic showdown, a battle of poets, Viking poets. If you don't know, that's what Skalds are. So this is the showdown of the Viking poets. And the poetry would be very much focused on deeds and accomplishments, heroic epics, telling the tale of some mighty warrior or some crazy witch or whatever else it's going to be. It is usually about individual accomplishments as opposed to other types of stories, right? It's really like praising individual valor and things like that. And it makes sense considering that it comes from originally old societies that had views of the afterworld where it's like, Valhalla, warriors, heaven, and stuff like that, where only the truly worthy get to enter and worth is based on individual merit, right? That's the concept behind all of that. So let's take a look at how the card actually works. So Showdown of the Skalds is 1 red, 1 white, and 2. And the first thing to note about that is this is the first multicolored Saga that we have received. If you really want to get technical, you could point at that one special like Hero of the Realms card that they made as the first gold Saga. But for me, I don't really count cards that they've only made like 10 copies of and only really give out to Wizards employees as us getting them. So in the strictest sense, yes, multicolored Sagas, one existed before this, but in terms of general access and what we all have, this is really the first multicolored Saga that we got. So we're gonna see, I am imagining more of these multicolored Saga. So this is white-red. The first thing you're going to do when it comes into the battlefield is you're going to exile the top 4 cards of your library, and until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. The fact that it's till the end of your next turn makes it far better, right? Otherwise, this is a pretty slow-rolling operation. You're paying 4 mana to get access to 4 cards, and if you didn't have access to those 4 cards until your next turn, you better have a ton of mana to cast them right away. But on top of that, having the cards hold over until the next turn actually ties in to the other ability of the card, which is what you're going to do for the next 2 turns after you play it. So put it out, exile the top 4 cards. On your next turn, you get a trigger that says, whenever you cast a spell this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So obviously the first ability plays in well to the second ability, because even if you have an empty hand when you draw the Showdown of the Skalds, you automatically have access to 4 cards, and on top of that, it's extremely difficult for your opponent to disrupt those cards. In Standard, it's almost impossible, right? There's like, there's that, is that one black, is there still that one black sorcery that will let you get rid of an exiled card? I'm pretty sure from Throne of Eldraine to take care of adventure cards. I think there literally might only be one answer to exiled cards right now. Oh no, I guess if you thought about Drannith Magistrate, cards can't be played from outside. So there's a couple. But either way, there are very, very few ways to stop your opponent from like taking advantage of these exiled cards, which means it's difficult for your opponent to stop you from taking advantage of the cards. And by having the 4 cards in exile, it means you're going to get up to 4 opportunities to put +1/+1 counters on your creatures. So, I mean, this is a rare. I will admit, when looking at it at first blink, I felt a little underwhelmed by the power level of the card, but then that's probably because when I originally read it, my brain treated it as if you had to play the cards the same turn. So the fact that the spells carry over to the next turn makes it pretty interesting. The fact that you're going to get 2 full turns of +1/+1 countering on target creatures is cool. When you take a look at the art, and then we'll talk about like how that breaks down with the flavor as well, I love the fact that the Saga cards have a full long strip of magic art. Instead of the box situated at the top, we get a longer, almost poster-like variation, and it allows for a different exploration of magic art, right? Because if you take a look at this, and I'm going to start from the bottom. If you start at the bottom, you can see there are 3 runes placed like this, right? You've got 3 glowing runes, and they are around what looks to be, to me, the World Serpent. What do they call him again in this world? I believe in Kaldheim they're calling him Koma? Something like that? Like K-O-M-A, if I'm not mistaken. We're just starting out, right? So, well, I'll get that more hammered in my head. But either way, that appears to me to be like the World Serpent with his mouth open and his tongue flicking upwards, which is interesting to me because I wasn't sure when we read the information about that Planeswalker Tyvar yesterday, whether the World Serpent was just something that was respected and revered by the elves, or if this is something that overall plays into all the different cultures on the world, because we don't know exactly like if this serpent is like a real god that affects the world, or if this serpent is a mythological creature that doesn't technically exist. I mean, it looks to me like it's probably a real thing, right? So you've got the World Serpent opening its mouth, forking its tongue up, down like on the platforms right above that, on either side of the tongue. That to me are the skulls that are involved in the showdown. So they're actually the main 2 characters of this showdown. The way that they're posed, like the one guy posed like this, has a very like oration style to it. And like the pointing off like this, they both look like they're stuck in sort of storytelling poetic stances, right? And if you compare it to the people that are shown up above them, those people are shown holding their swords up. I do like the symmetry of the 2 different, probably like king level individuals or massive barbarian warriors, whatever, standing there with their swords up on either side. So those to me are actually the subjects of the showdown, right? So you've got the Skalds. They specialize in poetry written about epic heroic deeds. So that's what they're going to be doing, right? It's basically like Showdown of the Skalds, in my opinion, would be something that would happen if like multiple clans meet together in some kind of like prestige thing where they each have their Skalds, and Skalds are of the oral tradition. And by that, I mean, instead of having like pen and paper and writing their poems out or whatever, they learn the history of their people, their deeds, and recite it through poetry that they either spontaneously make up on the spot or pre-construct in their minds, but it's all just done mentally and it's not recorded down somewhere. I like that. It's got a pretty kind of primitive feel to it. I mean, how easy do you have access to paper and things like that in the first place in some of these harsh societies? So you've got the oral tradition where you're going to have you're going to have the brightest, smartest storytellers from each of these tribes. And the Skalds don't necessarily have to be weak intellectuals. They can also be, you can have a dude who's like a big, beefy warrior. He's good with a sword and also, or an axe, and can also write amazing poems that sing the praises of his fellow brothers in battle. You know, like that is an awesome concept. Normally, when you think of poets, you think of like a foppish kind of hat and a big quill. Oh, my lady, 'tis for thee my heart flutters. You know what I mean? So the idea of a gritty, battle-hardened, ripped poet that's just like from a culture that values heroic deeds. That's just so awesome. You know what I mean? That's such a cool concept. So you would get together with different groups. They would all send their best skald out to recite the stories, the great deeds of the people from their tribe, singing how they've slain mighty beasts and overcome these obstacles, right? So the whole thing, it's like a prestige contest. It's like a big old flex and brag zone where everyone's going to come out and they're going to sing the praises of their group versus your group. And then as an overall group, everybody's going to decide who the victor is, right? That's a cool concept. So you've got the skalds there on the platform. You've got the warriors up above them. And you can actually see two tiny little other figures kind of with their arms outstretched in victory poses behind each of those kings. So to me, each of these skalds is representing each of the warriors above. That's the contest. So their battle will be told by how well they can recite and excite, right? How well they can recite the tales of their glorious leader and how much they can excite their audience through the telling of the tales, their passion, all of that. I can totally get into this concept, right? And if you think about it from a flavor perspective, exiling the top 4 cards of your library could be the skalds being told like, yo, you can each pick 4 stories or 2 stories each, settling that kind of thing. That part, the flavor is a little bit muddy maybe, but the flavor of the second ability is way, way on point. Whenever you cast a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So it's like the skald is telling the details of that one's life, and they grow stronger through the telling as they gain prestige and become more important to their group and other groups, man. It's a really, really cool concept and an interesting way to resolve disputes perhaps too. You know what I mean? Some things are going to be resolved through trial by combat, and some things could be as simple as these two epic storytellers reciting poems of the greatness of their members. Man, that's fun. That's really cool. I could see myself being one of those skalds. I like to talk about stories. I love all that. Anyways, that's Showdown of the Skalds. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like what I'm doing here, like, comment, subscribe. It's all great for this skald right here. And yeah. Other than that, I'll put up a link to my newest lore video on one side, a link to my silliest video, my newest silly video on the other side. Feel free to check either of them out if it's interesting to you. And if not, hope you have a good one. So I guess goodbye for now, my friends. See you tomorrow.